Hello. I am Chaz Evans, Director of Exhibitions for VGA Gallery and co-host for today's special episode of VGA Fireside, where we are going to have multiple guests to discuss and celebrate and announce the publication of the VGA Reader Issue 4. But before we do, I have a list of credits and thank yous to offer because gratitude, as always, is the true path. I'd like to thank producer and director of operations, Bryce Poles, and I'd like to thank designer and director of communications, Eleanor Schichtel. I'd like to thank the VGA staff and the VGA board. I'd like to thank the Independent Game Designers Association Chicago chapter. Thank you, Ross, for helping spread the word, as always. And I want to offer a special thank you to the VGA Reader staff and the VGA Reader editorial board for the work they do making the publication of the VGA Reader possible. And I also want to issue a thank you and congrats and acknowledgement of the contributors to VGA Reader Issue 4 who are not joining us on the episode today, who are Don Knowles Ball, Regina Seawald, Andrew Bailey, and Alexandre Paquette. I want to also thank the Electric Mirrors for the very groovy intro music you were just enjoying, and I want to thank the Oldham Music Center Youth Brass Band for the VGA Fireside fanfare that you're about to enjoy. And if you know of an organization or group that is interested in this kind of program or have any feedback whatsoever, please drop us a line, as always, at info@vgagallery.org. We would love to hear from you. And with that, all of the credits and thank yous have been issued, and I would like it if Bryce hit us with the VGA Fireside fanfare. Yes, the fanfare has played. This particular episode of VGA Fireside has begun, and I'd like to begin by introducing my special co-host for tonight's episode, Tiffany Funk. Tiffany Funk is an artist, critical theorist, and researcher specializing in emerging media, computer art, video games, and performance art practices. She is, notably for today, the editor-in-chief of the Video Game Art Reader and visiting assistant professor and co-founder of Ideas. This is the Ideas program at the University of Illinois at Chicago. Please, everyone from every corner of the internet, please welcome Tiffany Funk to VGA Fireside. Tiffany.
Hello. I'm pleased to be here. Hello, Chaz.
Hi, Tiffany. How's it going?
It's going well. It's going well.
I'm so glad to hear it. Are you pumped for a special multi-person and multi-guest episode of VGA Fireside?
Yes, I am. This is going to be great. I'm so happy about this.
What are we in store for?
We're going to have to do a little bit of explaining as to what the reader is for those who aren't familiar, but
sure. Yeah. So there's going to be multiple special guests, as we just mentioned. Tiffany is co-hosting, so Tiffany's got possibly all the good questions today. I might just be following up, unlike normal, following up with just sort of, secondary questions. We'll find out. And perhaps Tiffany will even have questions for me, thus turning the tables on who normally gets to ask the questions on VGA Fireside. Anyway, Tiffany, would you do us the honor of introducing our additional special guests who are also contributors to the VGA Reader Issue 4?
Yes, I would love to. Our first, second, am I considered the first? Well, we're co-hosts.
We're co-hosts.
So the first of our guests is Uchechi Anomnachi. He's a PhD candidate in American Studies at the University of Iowa. His work primarily concerns the nature of transnational cultural interactions between Black Americans and Asians in the post-World War II era, with a particular focus on media consumption and martial arts engagement. And our next guest is Chris Reeves. He is an artist and art historian specializing in 20th century and contemporary art in the United States and Europe. His dissertation, Playing Music Badly in Public, Brian Eno, Experimentalism and the Limits of the Non-Musician, examines a widespread trend among artists in the 1970s of starting musical acts and the lasting effects of such efforts. More broadly, his research interests include art and technology, internet art, artist books, fluxus, performance art, punk and DIY, and localized collaboration. In early 2020, he released The World's Worst, a guide to the Portsmouth Sinfonia, edited with Aaron Walker through Sober's Cove Press.
Let's bring them on out. Hey. Hello. Thanks so much for joining us, Uche and Chris. How are you feeling? How's the internet weather?
Feeling today? So good. I was thinking that, maybe I should come up with questions for you two. And just add another wrinkle to this already dubious Who Questions Who Fireside.
Extra wrinkling is allowed and encouraged.
And then you should bring out that mirror in the back.
What mirror?
The mirror.
What mirror?
You mean this door?
Sorry, I interrupted you.
I'm just happy to be here. I wasn't going to add any extra wrinkles.
That's fine. It's also not mandatory, but it's great to have you both. And I guess we should start, Tiffany, by establishing for the viewing audience who's normally perhaps accustomed to seeing and listening to artists who make video games on this program. We're talking to people who have written about video games in a particular publication, which is VGA Reader, which has released its 4th issue quite recently. Will you tell us about the VGA Reader? And perhaps, Bryce, could you give us a visual example of what it looks like? And maybe even the URL for where someone can read this publication. But Tiffany, what's VGA Reader?
Yeah, so the Reader, it all comes down to, it's already been years ago. It was 2016 when we really started the Reader up with VGA Gallery. The thought was to have some sort of a journal that dealt with games and gaming, that had sort of the framework of an academic journal, but was a little bit more inclusive. So gaming communities, say, any game enthusiasts, game makers, to encourage them all to both read and submit to the journal. So this was the 4th issue now that we've put out, now in collaboration with Amherst College Press, which is great because it's all still open access. So if we throw out a link to it, you can read the entire thing. And then there also is an IRL real version that you can buy and get in your midst. So, and that should be coming out soon. So, I think that really covers sort of what the Reader does. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a peer-reviewed journal. It's about video game art. There are other peer-reviewed journals on video game studies. This one is particular in that it focuses on video game art and sort of has a core of art historical inquiry methods, but like you said, has a bunch of disciplinary methods and other forms of inclusivity past that. And we're lucky enough to have the time to talk to people who have contributed to this issue. And believe it or not, your intrepid host, Chaz Evans, also contributed to this issue. So I'm here in a kind of dual capacity. So yeah, Bryce has generously shared a short link to this publication, which is free for everyone to read online through Amherst College Press. Does that explain everything? Should we wrap it up right there, or should we get into it?
Hold on, no. Yeah, we should get into it. So the way that I'm going to work this with questions is more just like going through it more in the order that you all appear in the reader, because otherwise we'd be doing it alphabetically, and that doesn't make any sense. Chaz, yours is the first article, kind of the feature article that we show in the reader, but I want to back up just a little bit so we can talk a little bit about the original call for papers that we put out, because it was you and I that were really collaborating on this particular call for papers and what this was. Can you talk a little bit about the nugget for where the idea for this issue came from?
The overall theme for this issue was overclocking. That was the sort of single word that we thought could try to store all the different conversations and feeds that can go in and out of this issue. That's a little piece of PC hardware jargon, overclocking your processor. That's commonly used by people who like to get the most of their performance out of PCs while they're playing video games. But it's sort of like you're using more than the processor was designed for, essentially, right? In order to get that little extra bit of performance or power or value or time. So that, as a metaphor, sort of spoke to, I think, a lot of practices and also crises in video games, and also that the video games are not separate from the world, the crises that are just in the world as well. So crises that deal with strained labor, having to work too much and too hard, and having not enough time to complete labor, and also trying to grow at a rate and capacity that might be past what anything was designed for as far as growth, and what kind of like consequences happen thereafter. So that's a quick way to try to describe the theme and sort of like what all the entries contribute to that sort of like pretty broad idea in one fashion or another. And I kicked the issue off with an essay called Exponential Backlogs, which is also a kind of manifesto in the defense of short games. I'll try to summarize the argument very, very quickly. We've got too many video games. They take a very long time to make, right? They're incredibly labor intensive. They're also often, not always, but very often, really, really long. They take a long time to play. In fact, there's a sort of virtue or premium on very, very long games as being more value, be more valued, shall we say. Also, there are people with lives where there's less and less time for people to play games that are getting longer and longer. And there's also just there's just so many games themselves, many of which that never actually see a player base themselves. So people often, if we took all these strands together, we just see a whole lot of waste at the center of video game production. There's people working too hard, making games that people don't have time to play. And also digital distribution platforms that are trying to sell them that no one sells them on, so they actually just sort of sit there and don't get played, and therefore all that labor sadly might be for nothing in some cases. So that was a sort of problem of dynamics that I tried to point out. Oh, there's a sort of object that symbolizes this sort of over-acceleration of video game production and not enough time to play or make them, which is the the Steam calculator websites. I'll just very quickly do a little share for my own screen. So these are sites that you can log on through your own Steam account and show you how many video games you own, how long it will take to complete all of them. There's how long to beat Steam and Steam Calculator. If you put your information there, it's sort of invariably like approaching, like a human lifespan so worth of entertainment or more. Then there was other ones that could actually show you how much wasted hours of video games you've played or have not played into a leaderboard, making a metagame of too much video games. If you have so many video games in Steam, you don't know what to play, then there's a website that will automate telling you how to navigate your own overly populated Steam library, right? These are these websites themselves I sort of use as this dynamic problem of video game waste at the center of it. So it might seem like a trenchant statement that's coming after long games, and I try very hard to make sure that's not the case. We should still have beautiful, long, and deep video game experiences, I believe, but there's an advocacy for the knowledge and the reward and sort of incentive for other categories of games, and how about a very simple term? We'll just call them short games, because they describe themselves already when you call them short games. They're games that are short. This seems kind of overly obvious, but we don't actually have that term as sort of a popular, vernacular term for a category of video games, the way we have a term like short film. So if the piece then just sort of recommends that we actually adopt this and then therefore highlight more sort of reward, maybe even a little prestige, and maybe a little just general encouragement for both the production and consumption of short games. And as by the law of averages, this should very much help with that problem of video game waste that I just tried to lay out earlier, without actually censoring anyone or trying to tell anyone to do something that they don't want to do, right? So it's just a sort of language shift that I think could actually be very beneficial for a sort of a problem, a vast problem of overwork. So I give to you the short game. If you feel like it's too long to make a RPG that's 120 hours, guess what? It is too long. You should make a short game. Maybe you're at the point in your life where you're now a parent and or have other kinds of relational responsibilities, perhaps multi-generational family living responsibilities, and the idea of playing a 100-hour plus game is ridiculous for the sort of responsibilities you have. Guess what? Short games are going to be there for you, but maybe one that you can just hop in and take care of into a night. So I think there's a general recognition of this, that the short games do exist, and there's some that have received context and conversation and play. But formalizing this, even from a sort of industrial and production standpoint, I think would help out at multiple levels, not just the consumption of games, but also the production of games. So that's I hope that wasn't too long, but that was the overall summary of the piece.
No, that's great. As a quick question, do you know what your own backlog is?
Yeah, I don't want to say because if I mention it, it'll either seem far too large to some, or like for those who are participating in that meta game, so I have the most unplayed hours of Steam, then I'll be losing that game. It's a lot of hours. We'll just say that. Just like anyone else who puts who maybe dubiously puts their Steam credentials into these third-party sites, you probably shouldn't do. You find out that you've got way too many video games to play.
Yeah. Well, I mean, now in the age of like buying bundles for, for different causes, trying to pitch money in, I mean, that also just leads to this aggregation of so many games. I mean, that's where most of my games probably come from in my Steam list. But so just for like, so everybody knows, when you're thinking particularly about some of these like ridiculously long games, I mean, what are some of the games that are the most, and this is not to call any game out, but like, what are the games that are most egregious in terms of longness, also being, I don't know, like infamous for like labor practices in that respect?
Yeah, I'd say, I mean, you're putting me into a bad corner, right? If I mention this is recorded, and say anything that's remotely negative about someone else's favorite game, we're gonna have a lot of trouble. But I'd say, I'll put it this way, but I'll mention Skyrim, because I've always wanted to play Skyrim, and I never have played Skyrim. It seems like the kind of game I would really like. I think that there would be a whole lot of narrative and a lot of characters that would probably fill my imagination. And I've realized that the sort of things that I have to do to make sure that I'm not being, fired from my job and meeting responsibilities with the people I know and family concerns. Like, it's just, if I started playing Skyrim, it would just be always a crisis, right? It was like, how can I participate in this the way that I feel like I would want to enough while still making all of those other responsibilities happen? And I feel like that kind of sort of like anti-social dilemma that could be felt with so many other games. But I'll put that as I know it's like it's that game. It's like, it's as if I feel like I have played it and I never have, because it is just so famously time consuming.
Right. Yeah. It's also really, whoops. Sorry. I have a phone call apparently, reminding me about an eye appointment.
Take care of your eyes.
So one thing that I was thinking about with this, and I've thought about it a lot lately, you mentioned this idea of like, especially like with living in multi-generational households, when you have like caregiving sort of duties that you have to perform. Chaz, you're on the precipice of being a two-child household. I am already a two-child household. And so it starts at this idea of like, okay, I'm a parent and I cannot play hours and hours of video games anymore. Like, there's only so many hours of the day. The kids go to sleep at this time. I can play this for a little bit. For us, though, it has turned into how can I keep my kids away from these certain games because of the way in which they suck you in and take so much time, especially being a video game researcher and wanting to promote games. Do you have any thoughts about that? Because like, it gets into the whole like Minecraft, Roblox sort of thing that it just completely Stardew Valley.
My own kids are not of video game playing age yet. Well, I said it's kids, like I don't even have the second one yet.
Sort of do.
But I do think about this a lot. I mean, it speaks to the same problem for sure, just because if there's a certain title you think might be appropriate at a certain time, it might even be beneficial for someone's media diet at a certain time, but you want to know about it earlier than that small human reaches that age, then you are the time pressure becomes even more. We are limited to playing it only when that young person is in bed or like at school or in daycare, and those are like there's so many other important things that need to happen during those regular daytime hours, so that it seems like to accomplish anything significant, something like Minecraft during like a daycare or even like a school day. This is I guess this has really shifted the parenting perspective, but you asked the question, so it makes the prospect of a lot of these kinds of titles just like it's just, well, they're no longer inviting you into inviting themselves into your life, or you inviting them into yours, right? So another thing that hopefully a premium and sort of new recognition of short games can help with. And I think the shortness in games may also lend itself to producing more valuable titles and pieces of interactive media for younger audiences, like very young, potentially younger audiences as well. But anyway, I guess that definitely, like I said, brings us to the conversation to a particular subjective perspective, one that's thinking about time as well as children, which is not everyone. So let's make sure we get different perspectives on the overclocking issue going very, very quickly. So let's talk to our next guest.
Yes, definitely. So next, I really want to talk to you, Uche, about your... I love this particular essay. Let me bring it up so I remember the exact name of it, because I don't want to say it wrong. Let's see here. We've got Racial Architecture, Building the FGC. I always almost say FCC, which is an entirely different thing. And I'm going to give you a total softball question first, because I just have to. Like when we spoke before, I said that Super Smash Brothers Ultimate has become like a thing in my household now, because my kids are at a point where it's like, oh, we have mastered the controller. Who is your fighter of choice?
Big question.
My Smash main. Yesterday, when we were talking and Bryce was in the room, I said Kirby, because Kirby is like my old main from Melee and Brawl. In Ultimate, I have the characters that I play that really annoy my friends. And that's what it's all about for me. So maybe Marth, just because every now and then you hit them with the tip of the sword and they die, and they didn't expect to die and they hate it. So
Marth is actually a good choice. See, I just pick the funniest one. So I always do the Wii Fitness instructor, because I just find it so hilarious and not good moves.
The very fact that she's in the game at all.
Do you have any particular favorites that you use?
Who you talking to me?
Yeah, Chris.
Oh.
Do you guys have?
I didn't know you were asking. Usually, if I'm playing, it's going to be the Captain Falcon, but a different hue.
Oh,
So,
that's right.
yeah.
Choose the different hue. I always do green Kirby. For some reason, it just looks terrible. He looks like Slimer then. Yeah. So, Chad.
I always play White Knight Marth because of an inside joke that I have with my sister.
White Knight, like in the way that like we think White Knight, like Okay, that's awesome. Chaz, do you have a favorite in Super?
I remember just spamming with Ness because it seemed like an oddball, but that's all. It really is. There's no actual skill ever administered in those experiences. Just buttons. Yeah.
It's button mashing.
Yeah.
That's what, like, most of Super Smash Brothers is a lot of. If you're not in the fighting game community, I think is a lot of Smash, at least for me. So, Uche, since your article gives us really great overview of the fighting game community as this, and you describe it as a hype spectacle and its relationship to Black Americans, I'd like to trace that back a bit, which you outline a little bit in the article, like for a particular, like, favorite of mine, because you mentioned Enter the Dragon, of course, love it, 1973 Bruce Lee film, being such a touchstone for Black Americans. And what is it specifically about martial arts films and a lot of Southeast Asian media, like manga especially, that has historically attracted a lot of Black American communities?
So if we're talking about movies, which kind of like serve as the entry point for what becomes just like a general fascination with manga, anime, other genre of movies outside of the Hong Kong like action cinema. There are a lot of like factors that people point to as what is the impetus of this affinity. For some people, it's the fact that the heroes simply weren't white at a time when, if you wanted action spectacle, the options were white heroes or these outrageous black caricatures in the form of blaxploitation stars. And this isn't to say that Black Americans didn't love the white heroes or the blaxploitation stars, but there are specific undercurrents in a lot of martial arts media, especially in the way that morality and resistance are like sort of embodied by heroes. So when Bruce Lee is beating up, 30 ninjas, at the same time, he is this morally righteous and like warrior for justice that like resonates with Black audiences. It's what Amy Onjiri refers to as the non-white hero. It's you can look to a lot of places for the source of that affinity, I think. But like it becomes this culturally instantiated object. Like Black people for, generations now sort of uptake the admiration for martial arts action heroes that their parents or uncles or older cousins had, and like create this sort of long-standing tradition. I think
it's really cool because it also seems like a lot of that media also like accepted and loved it. It didn't pander to the audience. It was like, oh, we're gonna cast Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. Like, we're going to do these things that are just kind of crazy, but while at the same time, it's not just some sort of weird fan service. It's just oddball choices that get people, like when you're talking about hype spectacle, I mean, what is that fight scene if not like total hype spectacle, right?
Well, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar was a student of Bruce Lee. Like he exists in this tradition.
Yeah, and it's funny too with like that culturally, it kind of reifies itself over and over again in ways that like real homage, but also pastiche. You got Thundercat and Dragon Ball Durag, which is like as far as a music video goes, and of course all the sort of manga references and things like that. When you talk about, can you just sort of define hype spectacle, like in terms of the fighting game community a little bit?
Sure. And honestly, I'm really glad that Chaz went first and touched on the concept of labor, both the labor of creating and the labor of playing, because in its original form, this paper was largely about the labor performed by, the conduits of this hype in the form of Black casters, sometimes players, sometimes even just audience members, where Black people were looked to as the source of hype in the community. And I think that hype is, a little bit different from general excitement. Rather than being something that's experienced in an individual way, hype is something that is, communal. So, when I go off to establish this long history of communal consumption for video games, manga, anime, movies, that is really like the key thing that brings Black Americans and hype in confluence to the fighting game community. And then spectacle is the way that these hype moments sort of get packaged and like shipped, sealed, or like all across the internet to represent the excitement and enjoyment that one might have at a, fighting game tournament or SmashCon. I don't know if you guys have been to a lot of fighting game tournaments, but things like the Daigo Umehara Evo Moment 37, where he blocks 15 consecutive parries, or where he parries 15 consecutive attacks, they don't happen all the time. Like, it's sort of a rare occurrence. I think I sent that clip earlier if you want to show it, but it is like just demonstrative of the very concept so well.
Rare footage of Daigo actually angry. Just its turtle style. Overcome Rao. Now on the verge of putting Daigo down 1-0.
So it relies on a lot of things, like everyone in the room kind of knowing what's going on, like the ability to appreciate something like this, and you hear the crowd getting louder and louder, the turnaround, the combo to finish it, like everyone's on their feet clapping. It's this very pure moment where the vehicle of that hype is the mechanical spectacle that they've just seen. Everyone in the room, it even ends with the "you had to be there." Everyone feels it together. They understand the insanity of what they're watching. And then there's this other version of hype that I also referenced in the paper, but I don't think I sent the clip along. The famous Wombo combo, if you've heard of it, where really the point of attraction is simply the fact that the caster, homemade waffles, or Brandon Collier, if you prefer, is getting more and more excited as this, technical display, but not something so mechanically insane as what you just saw. The source of the hype, the vehicle of that hype, is just the performance of the Black body, or I guess disembodied voice, that's watching it.
Can I jump in with the question about hype? And I'm thinking about hype, or the production of hype, right? The labor that goes behind making a hype moment, right? Like that's running concurrently with the racial architecture that you describe in the piece. I guess I hope this isn't getting too far off topic from the action that goes on in the game itself, but there's a competition going on with the fighting games naturally. Is there also a kind of meta competition going on with the making of hype, right? Like, is there a competition between different casters trying to produce better hype from one tournament to the next, or even maybe you as a playing like a solo competitive game as an audience member, it's like, I want to contribute to a hype moment that's even like more amazing than the last thing I went to.
So, like I said, it's the original paper was about the labor behind hype, and I sort of rounded it off with this warning almost that the outsized development of this demand for hype, the way that fans want to see moments like Evo Moment 37 all the time, is somewhat unsustainable, which is why I thought the piece was appropriate for the overclocking issue. Is that lack of sustainability. But ultimately, I decided that there was actually a really good lesson in the way that the fighting game community manufactures and exports hype, given the fact that the community grew from these grassroots origins. This is not to say that there isn't a possible problem with the manufacturing of hype spectacle for the viewer for the monetary value that it can create when it comes to the continued growth of a scene like this. But I think that in the case of the fighting game community, this hype is is a natural occurrence that is the result of this racial architecture rather than a, soulless product.
Right.
Mhm.
But it still opens up some moments where you say like hype happens, this produces monetary value, but then it's like there's a question of who gets to capture that. Right.
Yeah.
And like the potential
I think that
problems.
the clip that I just showed is copyrighted. I don't remember who owns the copyright, but somebody owns the copyright. And
just remember, YouTube, this is an educational program.
Fair use. Fair use.
Yes, please.
Okay, you
and
said
just the fact that someone can.
you've said the phrase soulless product, and that is like the perfect segue to Chris's article.
Is it?
It is, and hear me out,
Tell us,
Right.
Tiffany.
because it's within your article when you talk about and the article, I should say the name, your article, Multiball and Multiplicity, Suzanne Ciani and the Voice of Xenon, talking about Suzanne Ciani specifically in the commercial work she did, becoming the voice of these products, despite the fact that the products are like so packaged, she kind of embodies these things, which is sort of the opposite of it. And I think it's so interesting that Suzanne Ciani isn't thought of as a pioneering figure of video games. I mean, that's not what we think of her. But that really is part of a little bit of your argument in the article. So because we're probably talking to a bunch of video game enthusiasts, Chris, can you tell us who is Suzanne Ciani and how do you think she should be best regarded? Like, what is her legacy, really?
So Suzanne, and I'm sorry, I'm not doing this to correct it, but I think it's Ciani. It's okay. Ciani, like they, like the way they say it.
That's how Mario would say it.
Let's not get into ugly stereotyping here on the Fireside. But so Suzanne Ciani is probably most generally known for kind of these new wavy ambient like records from like the late 70s, 80s into the 90s. So really sort of like, the kind of music you listen to when, it's like spa day or something. But she also, before that, and kind of simultaneous to it, is a pioneer on this electronic musical instrument called the buchla, which is a very complicated synthesizer, really difficult thing to play. And so Ciani studies with the buchla's inventor, also named Buchla. And and so she becomes sort of this expert on this very difficult to play machine, becomes kind of this electronic music pioneer. And so somewhere into the early 70s, she begins to get commissioned to do these sort of strange cybernetic-ish compositions for these more like the clientele ranges from like GE dishwashers to Merrill Lynch. So she becomes a commercial composer, but with the sort of unique feature of being able to create compositions that are sort of more rooted in like an avant-garde world, an electronic avant-garde compositional world, maybe more John Cage and less commercial design music. And so, ultimately the way that I'm sort of positing her in this article is that, so the inquiry really came out of watching this, I think I use this vignette in the article, there was like one of those pinball repair videos, right? Where it's, some old guy and he's got a pinball warehouse and he's showing, this got the back plate and this is light up and only 10 flippers and whatever, like, kind of going through the catalog of what has been done. And then he's talking about this particular pinball machine, Xenon, which is a famous Bali pinball machine. And he says that it's the first pinball machine to utilize a female voice. And then he says that female voice is a secretary, a nameless, faceless secretary at Bali. And so for me, and to your question, it's interesting to think about the way that some networks don't intercede, because in experimental music and these other kinds of worlds like that, Suzanne Ciani is very well known for being, the first female voice of Xenon, electronic composer. And then to think about that this, the gaming world maybe also knows this, but then that sort of midpoint level where there's somebody who repairs it, who fixed it, who makes sure that the machine, stays in rotation, stays alive, essentially, has no clue. And so for me, it was sort of an interesting thing to like examine, how these two or three networks kind of, general music and games kind of collide and don't in interesting ways. And Ciani being in a really funny place to not really quite, fit into any of those spaces either. So, yeah, I don't know. I think in terms of where to locate her, she's not you can't like quite pin her on that map really easy, which is why I wanted to write about this, because it was a strange little case study.
Yeah, she also hits like some weird sort of pop culture notoriety as well. That clip with David Letterman, right?
Yeah.
Totally. Do we have the clip?
Is NBC.
Looks like we do.
Ladies and gentlemen, this woman standing next to me is an electronic wizard. She composed many of the soundtracks you hear on commercials. She's reproduced the electrical musical effects for the disco version of Star Wars, and she's won award after award. This is Suzanne Ciani. And what? Now that was making. She's doing odd things now. Isn't it?
It just has a mind of its own sometimes.
Let's tell the people. Yeah. Why don't we?
This will be a little bit better, David.
Okay. Tell them what we got here. This looks like just a normal keyboard, and then all of this other stuff appears to be computers.
Well, more or less.
Pretty much it, huh?
This is a synthesizer. It's called a Prophet synthesizer. This is an arrangement of electronic gear that I call the voice box, which is used mainly for processing voices and other sounds, and it has in it a vocoder, frequency follower, an eventide harmonizer, a Marshall time modulator.
Well, that means nothing to anybody but you. Show us what kind of things you can generate out of this, and then tell us what you've, what the sounds you've used for what things and so forth.
Okay, well, the voice box is...
Okay, you're going to demonstrate that, huh?
Yes,
Don't be afraid.
Sometimes my voice has a little bit more authority. You can pick up my direct voice on this. And this is my male voice.
Mm-hmm. So
This is my almost male voice.
and this is mine.
Going like was there?
No, that's a good call. I was just I was watching the clip so much that I forgot we could be talking about the reader, and I was like, "Oh, that's good. Good idea, Tiffany." That's all I was saying. Like, good idea. Let's lower the volume so we can talk and stuff.
And the thing is about this, I'm like sitting here just drooling over the anyway, and the way that he's even speaking to. I mean, this is kind of like it is a Letterman thing, but it's sort of like that means nothing to anybody but you.
I have a question for Chris, if I may.
Yeah.
This is also remember a question just about the story about how you settled on the subject and then decided to work on this case study more than it is about your analysis, which is really interesting and I think like very it's negotiated, right? You handle it from really all these different sides and make the sort of end of your analysis of Ciani really balanced. But just from at the very beginning, like, were you aware of Ciani's work on Xenon, the pinball machine, and then found this erroneous quote saying like, "Oh, it's just some secretary," or was it the other way around where you did that you were unaware of the credit of Ciani's work in Xenon and then found other documentation saying, "Oh, there was actually a really important artist here," because here we see her on Letterman. I mean, she was of considerable as far as electronic music at the time, that's some level of recognition. But I guess I'm just curious, which was it that you came across first, and that might explain sort of like the different areas that would actually understand her presence and those who might be omitting it.
Yeah, there was a Finders Keepers Records put out a sort of like compilation of Suzanne Ciani's like commercial work. I forget the name of it now, but there are short excerpts of Xenon on that record, and so I'm pretty sure that like I was like just sort of like YouTube, like, oh, what's the Xenon pinball sound like when it's played, and came across this video. And so I mean, yeah, I think that's like I don't know, it's not a very exciting answer, but yeah, I think it was music first, because I think I was aware that she had done that. Yeah.
It makes a lot of sense if we like Bryce, if you could bring up the actual like Xenon sounds. We have them, right?
To Xenon. Welcome to Xenon. Welcome to Xenon. Welcome to Xenon. Welcome to Xenon.
Suzanne Ciani.
Suzanne Ciani.
I know, it's always
it's like they're shaming me for not knowing how to pronounce her name.
I'm sorry.
They are. Sorry,
I,
Tiffany. That's yeah. They are.
I had a moment of like just like going with it, and like maybe I'll just mispronounce it wrong the whole time too. So.
Yeah, but so the thing it brings up too is like, okay, so knowing a bit about her and her kind of, I don't necessarily want to say persona. It sounds like she like puts it on, but she's very like, very out with the fact that it's like, oh yeah, I went to work for Don Buchla for like a day and was fired because he's a sexist. But I will continue to use Buchla products despite the fact that it is by far the more difficult synthesizer machine to use than if she were to have switched to Moog products. Very like interesting to me, because it's like she's a technologist, like above it, right?
Right.
And you put that alongside this like voice that is Xenon. It plays so much into that the archetype of like woman robot, evil woman robot, particularly like Metropolis robot, and like, I mean, we're even entering back into an era of evil woman robots, because like Picard, the series, which I have just started watching, like goes back into the Borg Queen sort of thing. There always feels like there's some sort of like along the time of technological panic, there's always a like, oh, and by the way, technology's female. Right. Do you think that she was like really, I don't know if I want to say aware or if this was a pastiche sort of thing for her? Is this part of that?
Yeah, I mean, I think like first, I mean, Buchla did fire her for some misogynist stuff, but she wouldn't quit. So that was like part of that story, was that she was like, yeah, I'm not leaving. So she did keep working with him, and they eventually, I mean, she called him her mentor and whatnot. So, I mean, she clearly had some affinity for that particular machine. In terms of like the way she thinks about it, from what I can tell, there's a really great documentary called Life in Waves, where she sort of talks about this a little bit more. But it seems like it's always approached pretty sincerely. I think, and that's what I thought was interesting about the idea of the commission, because when she's talking about, you know, going into Valley headquarters and seeing these big, you know, like you're saying, like almost heavy metal magazine, like big breasted robot, you know, paintings that are going to be used for this machine, she's hoping, and I think maybe in vain a little bit, that like she's going to sort of imbue it with something bigger than that, like give it some more humanity, give it something that's a little more substantial than, you know, just the evil cyborg woman, or just the idea that technology is gendered, et cetera, et cetera. And so, I mean, yeah, let's get into the 5 to 7 minute warning, but just to like sort of like, I think she's simultaneously, you know, like a good pitch person. She's very good at selling what she's doing and the strangeness of it and kind of leaning into that. But I think at the same time, she's very, very committed and serious to, like, I think what are some of her actual ideological beliefs, which are, you know, that like, you know, technology has feelings, technology has a humanity about it, and I'm sort of this passive vessel that, you know, makes that happen too. And so, yeah, she's a really, again, that documentary is very demystifying, but she's a really like interesting, and like love her for her borderline space, I think, in all this history.
Yeah, I could fan out about her all day, which we'll have to do sometime over drinks.
Different time.
Yes, a different time, because this is video game centric. But yeah, the fact that this game is one of the first to use that particular sort of technology to use like real human speech because of the sort of processor that it had. It really is a landmark, and a Chicago area sort of, you know, ups because of the Bally connection as well.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember what was maybe one of you all know the pinball. It's like a dinosaur. It's a dinosaur game, like Gorgo or Gorga something. But there is a human voice used, and he just says, you know, me and Gorgon. Like it's something just like the most like base stupid thing.
I think I know what this is. I don't remember what it is.
Yeah, no, I can't remember either.
Go or something.
You bring up the example just as a counterexample of like how much Gianni was able to, as it go. Oh, thank you, Bryce.
Thank you.
Bryce is always there for us when it comes to instantly naming vintage pinball games, among other pieces of media. But right, so that kind of voice seems very straightforward, just like someone just said a line, which is like a very different.
Yeah, that's why you talk like that.
It's very different sound composition than Gianni created for all the sound assets in Xenon, which centered her own creative practice in a much more sort of agency-filled kind of way, right?
Yeah, and like a ton more. Like, I mean, like I honestly don't remember off the top of my head now, but in terms of like, you know, the chip power used to actually make that happen in the machine, you know, significantly more than Gorgar as well. So,
and this, I guess we could make sure that everyone has a chance to weigh in. Bryce, do you want to textually make any counter arguments that Gorgon was also a landmark piece of sound art?
I'm good.
Okay.
God, where's my Gorgar defender?
Just like real, you know, even-handed journalism, you got to make sure all sides.
Yeah, I don't recommend looking up Gorgar.
Okay.
It's a bad table and relatively misogynistic.
Okay, so in that case, I think that actually helps support Chris's piece all the more. And the sort of uniqueness in the history of pinball that Xenon occupies. Wow. It's just about 60 minutes. I can't believe this has gone by so fast. but I I'm going to thank you again later, but thank you both, Uche and Chris, for joining us today, and thank you, Tiffany, for being my intrepid co-host on today's show. I guess this would be the kind of time where we spontaneously come up with brilliant, conclusory, off-the-cuff statements and questions that brings it all together. But did you have any of those, Tiffany?
How about I am Xena?
I am Xena.
I love that it devolved into like a Gorgar hate like conversation.
You just never know where it's gonna go.
No to Gorgar.
Remember,
didn't even know what it was called like 10 minutes ago.
So just remember, I am Xenon, Wombo Combo, and if you don't want to play long video games, it's okay.
Yep, short games for all.
There
he is.
That smile.
Yeah. Before we wrap, this is the internet, and we there are rules to the internet, and one of those rules is that everyone who is signing off of a conversation is allowed to plug whatever they'd like. Uche, is there anything you'd like to plug?
I didn't think of anything, so
that's okay.
I will pass.
Okay, that's fine. Chris, anything you just want to mention?
Or
say hello to someone?
Yeah, I mean, if I plug something, is it like does it date the video?
Well,
it's like if I plug something, it's going to happen in a.
There's going to be other ways to date the video too, so don't worry about it.
Be timeless. Okay.
Chris.
I got nothing. So yeah.
Okay.
Oh, what about your book?
Which book?
Ports.
Well, that came out like 2 years ago. I'm not gonna
still plug it.
Sure. Okay. So from 2020, The World's Worst: A Guide to the Portsmouth Sinfonia, about the world's worst orchestra from 1970s England, edited by me and Aaron Walker on Sober's Cove Press. Sober's Cove Press really putting out some of the best books in Chicago. So
yeah,
recommend.
Sober's Cove is really killing it.
Incredible. Last Gaspism, Art in the Age of the Pandemic.
Last
Anthony Romero and Dan Wang and people. So good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Good stuff.
Tiffany, anything you'd like to mention?
Well, I will have a book coming out, but I can't talk about it yet because it's not like an NDA or anything. It's just that we don't have a date for publishing yet. So sometime next year. So in the future, I will plug that.
Great. I feel like I was unfair. I put Uche on the spot. Now there's been a little time. Did you want to come back to get another chance? Have you thought anything? Or am I just making it worse by putting you back on the spot?
Follow my friend .melee on Twitter.
Terrific. I will just mention VGA Reader Issue 4. Why not check it out? It's available. It's open access. That means it's free. And it has the contributions that we talked about on today's episode, plus many other exciting ones. And there's the link right down there. Or I guess if you forgot the link or chose not to write those letters down, you would just look for it through the VGA Gallery website or the Amherst College Press website. I'll also mention prints, fine art prints, available through vgagallery.org. That's our website. We collect and sell fine art prints made by video game artists, and the sales for that go to the artists who made them, as well as the gallery and the organization behind it, so that programs like this are possible. So check out our website. Sign up for the VGA Zine. That's our regular online publication. So we have two publications: the Reader, we've talked about here for an hour, but also the VGA Zine for fast, loose, exciting,
hot
and cold takes about video game art and related cultural issues. I think that's all that I'm going to plug here. Are there any final catchphrases or words of wisdom that I would like to offer?
Hot eats, cool treats.
Hot eats, cool treats. Perfect. Any other takers on this invitation? Not mandatory.
Why did you say hot eats, cool treats? Why was that here?
She was auditioning a new catchphrase.
Sitting on that?
Like, where do catchphrases come from? You have to try them out once, and you don't know if it's going to be good at first.
I'm not Suzanne Ciani. Sorry.
Okay, yeah, it's fine. Yeah.
Because this is we're tag teaming it to close this out. Tiffany, would you like to reprise our credits and thank yous?
Sure.
Go right ahead.
So, thanks to producer and director of Ops, Bryce Pulls, designer and director of comms, Eleanor Schichtel, VGA staff and VGA board, Independent Game Designers Association, Chicago chapter. Thank you, Ross. The VGA reader staff and the VGA editorial board. Contributors, of course, to the VGA Reader Issue 4 that could not join us today: Deanne Knowles-Ball, Regina Seawald, Andrew Bailey, Alexandra Paquette, our wonderful intro music by Electric Mirrors, and fanfare by Oldham Music Center Youth Brass Band. If you know of any organization or group that would be interested in this program or have any feedback at all, please drop us a line at info@vgagallery.org. We would love to hear from you. Thank you all for joining us. And from all of us, the VGA Fireside, please stay warm.